This snake plant, also known as Sansevieria trifasciata or now Dracaena trifasciata, has not been doing especially well. It's been pretty underwatered and doesn't seem like it's been able to rehydrate very well. Typically, this is a very low maintenance plant, and I have several others that have done quite well in the same area. I thought I would repot this, take a look at the roots and see if there's anything going wrong there, and then also just divide these individual plants up into individual pots. And hopefully that will help me rehydrate them and get them used to the soak and dry method and go longer between watering. So now that some of the soil has been dumped out, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull the plant out and take a look at what's going on below. So I see a lot of individual plants, and there's also some new offshoots growing as well. So I'm gonna try and keep those attached to the plant they're originally growing off of. This won't do very well on its own. So I wanna keep it with the bigger plant, but separate all of these bigger ones into individual pots. The roots here look pretty healthy overall. There's not as many of them as I would have expected. And it also doesn't go quite as deep as I would have expected either. A problem with this pot that they've been growing in though is it has drainage holes, but the drainage tray is attached. It's also a pretty deep pot. And snake plants can grow in deeper pots better than some other succulents. However, they typically do best in a more shallow pot. So that's part of why I also want to put them in individual pots and get them into something smaller. So I'm gonna just pull these apart. Most of these are actually on their own. The stems are not attached. So it's more just breaking off the roots. However, I did just notice right there, we have a fresh break. And with this little trio, I'm gonna just divide right here. And these are attached via a stem. So you'll hear a little snap when I pull them apart. And the last one. All right, I'm gonna get the table cleaned up and then we'll pot these up. If I pull this up in the Succulent Tracker app, you can see this was last watered 14 days ago, but on average, I've been watering it every 9 days, which is quite a bit more frequent than I would typically recommend for a snake plant. If I go here into the images, you can see that when I first planted it, it was really healthy. These leaves were very thick and glossy. But over time, it just started to get really dehydrated and hasn't done especially well. I've done water therapy with it a few times to help it plump back up. But interestingly, within about 2 to 3 weeks, the leaves really dehydrate again and don't plump back up with regular watering. My theory is that because these were in a fairly deep pot, the water would just stay in the bottom of the pot and so the soil would never really dry out, and that would cause the lower roots to rot away. Somehow it wasn't enough to cause rot damage to the rest of the plant, but that is also why these have very shallow roots as opposed to roots that reach all the way to the bottom of the pot. Once these are potted into smaller pots on their own, I'm pretty confident that they will start growing more, they will stay plump longer, and they should get a little bit darker and develop a little bit more of a glossy sheen. Some of the plants are definitely more underwatered than others. Some of the newer ones do seem to be thick and healthy still. Having them all potted individually though will really help me to give them the care that they need. I'm just gonna center these in the pots and then add soil all around the base. As with most succulents, snake plants prefer being planted in a well-draining soil. They don't like to stay wet super long. So with these, I am planting them into the typical Bonsai Jack gritty mix that I use for almost all of my succulents. However, snake plant can tolerate soil that retains water a little bit longer. So if you have a mix that's not quite as gritty as this, it will still do well. You just have to make sure to leave plenty of time between waterings for the soil to dry out. Now you might be thinking, if I'm using this gritty soil, maybe that's the reason why these aren't retaining enough water. I have about half a dozen more snake plant though that are planted in the gritty mix, and they do just fine in this mix and can easily go about a month without water. Something interesting about snake plants are frequently used in office buildings and schools and places that don't typically get a lot of light but still want to have live plants. However, they are actually a full sun plant. So these will do well in a variety of different sun conditions. If you're growing them inside and they don't have a lot of light, you definitely want to err on the side of too little water because it will help them grow more slowly and help them maintain a nice shape to their leaves rather than getting somewhat stretched out or losing their color. Typically, when you're planting succulents, I recommend keeping the leaves above the rim of the pot, but that doesn't work very well with this little baby plant here. I am going to go ahead and bury this in the soil because that's actually where it was. When I unpotted this, only a tiny bit of it had actually popped through the soil so far. So I'm going to go ahead and plant it up that same way. Even though this particular plant has not done especially well for me, I have found snake plant to be one of the best beginner succulents. It can tolerate more frequent watering, it can tolerate less frequent watering, it can tolerate a lot of light, it can tolerate hardly any light. And so it's just a good all-around house plant, whereas most succulents don't tend to be great houseplants unless you're using grow lights. That's not to say that other succulents won't grow well indoors. It's mostly that they won't get quite enough light, and so they tend to stretch out. When snake plant gets stretched out, it's not quite as noticeable as it is with an echeveria because these leaves are already long and skinny. If it doesn't get enough light, they'll still be long and skinny, but just a little bit skinnier and less deep of a color. It was pretty quick to get these repotted, and I'm really excited to have them all divided up. Being in these shallow pots will help the soil to dry out more quickly. On average, these have been watered every 9 days, so I'll start with that watering frequency, but once I see that the leaves are plumped up, I will gradually cut that watering frequency back to help the plant become more drought tolerant. If you want to get a succulent that grows really well indoors with minimal lighting, snake plant is a great option. You can buy them in little pots like this, or they also come more fully grown in really large pots where these can reach several feet tall. I realized I should have taken a picture of this plant before I divided them, but I am going to still go ahead and update this in the app by adding a photo of one of the plants that is still left from this division, and I'm also going to mark that I repotted it. So here I'm just going to write down that I divided it into multiple pots. Then for the others, I'm actually going to go in and add them in separately as individual plants, and I'll store all of the same name and location information for these. You'll notice I do still have these labeled as Sansevieria instead of Dracaena. In my head, that is still their name. I have not converted to the new name yet, but I will probably go ahead and update that eventually as well. Or you know what, let's just go ahead and do it right now. Once I have all these in, they'll get put away, and then I will water them tomorrow after they've had a chance to heal for a little bit. I don't want those roots to accidentally rot from being replanted and watered right away. But then I will hopefully get them on a really good watering schedule where I can go several weeks between water instead of just 9 days.